morning and thank you for joining our live Facebook chat with Michael Dunkley, the Premier. He is here to answer your questions about this year's throne speech in real time. So we hope as many people as possible will participate and post their questions in the comments section under this live streaming event. Welcome, Mr. Dunkley. The Premier has no idea what he'll be asked, but he said he's open to all questions about the initiatives set out in this year's speech, or any that voters feel are missing. So please keep the questions coming and we will get through as many as possible. This speech, which was read out by the Acting Governor on Monday, covers topics including education, the environment, seniors, the economy, health and gang violence, and many others. It's wide-ranging, so there is a lot to go at. I'll kick us off by asking the Premier to think back to last year's throne speech and tell us which pledge, since fulfilled by his government, he is most proud.
Well, that's a good question, Sam, and let me backdrop it this way by starting that from one year to the next, throne speeches, you'll commit and you'll do a lot of things. Some might roll into the next year. I don't want to go back and be too specific about one pledge because there are so many in there, but I'll take it this way and I'll look at it overall. Since the time I became the Premier, obviously we've had a lot of day-to-day challenges we had to face. We've had to move the economy forward. We've tried to help those people in need and we're starting to make progress. But one of the things that I signaled early on in my tenure that I wanted to try to make government open, more transparent and more accountable. And so we passed PATI legislation. So if I'm carrying on against that backdrop, because I think we live in a world now where everything is out in the open, and that's all well and good because it raises the stakes on accountability and transparency. So I look back at some of the recommendations that came from the SAGE report and some of the things we had in the throne speech 2015 and how we've moved those forward with accountability at the highest levels of civil service with the assessments. Those are a reality now, moving forward with good governance and the code of practice being up on the website are just two, but I could go on and talk for the whole half hour on that.
I'm sure, yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned PATI because I use PATI a lot.
I noticed that. That's why I thought I'd start somewhere to make you happy.
Yeah, I'm a regular user of PATI. I still find it difficult to get information back from government. Is that, and you mentioned in this year's throne speech locking in accountability and transparency. How do you feel PATI's working?
Well, obviously, as I said in every statement that I made in the House when we debated it and we brought regulations forward or amendments to it, that we'll have to improve as we move along. I want to give a special thanks to all the public officers who are the information within their department. And so some of the challenges I think we've had is the access to the information at a timely matters because those public officers have other things that they're doing as well. And so that's one of the things we have to look at now and how we improve that efficiency of it.
Particularly now that there's been some decisions showing that the reason records haven't been released have been because of that, a lack of ability to actually do it. The resources.
Yeah, and remember, it's easy to ask a question. And some of the questions require detailed research. Like I've been asked questions and somebody wanted all emails that I've sent that had these words in it from this period to that period, and it extended from the time I was a government minister to in May of this year. I mean that's a lot of work, and
that's the nature of PATI though. If you pass PATI, I guess you've got to be prepared for
yes,
those kind of
but I think people also understand that sometimes if people have other responsibilities they have to do, that it's going to take some time to get to that, and that's why we built in that time frame bit, and that's what we have to look at to make sure we get it right, because obviously we want it to be an important tool, and we want people to use it in the most appropriate way. And that's why I think you'll see we try to put out as much information as we can into the public space so people don't have to ask the questions and get it. Why I started the travel website. I still get questions asked in the House of Assembly of me, which are already out in the public domain. So it's a living mechanism that we have to continue to tweak, and I thank the public officers for doing what they have to do. And the more members of the public, members of Parliament, and the public officers understand it, the better we will be.
Okay. Well, we'll move on from PATI to some of the readers' questions because we've already actually had some come in. We have a question from Kathy and Scott Savino, and they ask, why was climate change avoided in the throne speech? How will we as a country meet the goals we've committed to under the Kyoto Protocol? And I think this is about emission reduction targets, and I think Bermuda since 2007 has had to meet certain targets under that protocol. And is it meeting them? Why is it something you're not focused on? I guess is the question.
Well, I'll answer it in this way. First off, The lady you mentioned reaches out to me on social media quite a lot. It seems climate change is one of her big concerns or areas of interest, and I appreciate that. So let me first answer this question by saying that the throne speech is not an all-encompassing document of where your focus is. It can't be. Every year when we write the throne speech, people say to me, wow, last year was 27 pages, it took this long, and you try to shorten it down. This year I gave a directive to ministers that we had to keep it shorter. I wanted to try to keep it to 15, 16 pages, but when I looked at it, I couldn't cut it that short. So let me assure you, Kathy, that climate change is a big priority for us in Bermuda. You know, we live out in the middle of the ocean. So we're by ourselves, and we have, we have a number of different programs where we're monitoring things, we're trying to move forward. One of the challenges that I've seen, that my colleagues have identified since we became the government, is the Emissions Control Center. While it was put in, there's been a lot of debate about the product that we have there and how it's set up. We are taking emissions testing, but we're not using them in the appropriate way, and so we need to continue to move forward in that area.
So do we have targets here, or do we have, set targets or not yet?
Yeah, there's set targets.
And are there mandatory targets that we
Well, I can't answer that question specifically because I don't want to say something that is not exactly correct. But we do have targets that we're trying to reach into. We continue to monitor. Our air quality is very good generally. There's monitoring stations around the island. Foot of the Lane is probably one that people are most familiar with. BIOS has done a good job at that. But climate change is more than just monitoring emissions in Bermuda. Our traffic flow has dropped over the past couple of years, and one of the reasons why some people are not as concerned about emission control as it used to be is because all these new vehicles that are coming on the road, they have that technology where is if you're emitting stuff that's not appropriate, in some cases the vehicle just shuts down. So I think we're in a better position now than we were 15 years ago. There's still some older vehicles that are on the road, and we still need to be concerned about cycles. But when I look at climate change, I'm more concerned about our footprint and how we can do it and work with our bigger partners. We've seen with the advent of people talking about stronger hurricanes, how it impacts our coastline through the good work of the Ministry of National Security and Minister Jeff Barron and the National Disaster Coordinator. For the last hurricane, we had a map of the island of where our target area where we could have potential storm surge issues and stuff. So we're taking it to the next level. So it's something that we continue to focus on. Just because it's not the throne speech, I wouldn't have anyone jump to the conclusion that it's not important.
Okay, we'll move on to another one from Kathy, who says, will there be absentee voting for the next election for Bermuda and medical treatment? I think this was a pledge. Did you make it last year as well, and it hasn't happened yet? But you said in this year's throne speech, I think, that it's going to happen for students and those receiving medical treatment abroad before the next general election. But should all Bermudians living overseas have the right to vote here? Well,
that is a very good question, and that original pledge was in our platform before the last election. Obviously, it was important that we got it done before the next election, and thus that's the time frame that we set now. The Parliamentary Register has recently, with the cabinet changes, I believe in last May, came under the direction of the Cabinet Office. So one of the first things I did was meet with Ms. Woolwich, the PR, and go through a document that the previous minister, when it was under Home Affairs, had gone through on potential changes. Went through the document, and we agreed a way forward. Obviously, it's her responsibility to drive this change, but that document that we reviewed, we came to an agreement on how we could move forward. Absentee ballots, as you mentioned, were a key part. She's agreed to move it forward before the next election. Now, as far as residents abroad, that's something that I'm not going to commit to at this point in time.
British people can
for
up to 15 years.
I do know that, but we have to remember that as Premier Bermuda, I stay in tune and in touch with people from one end of the island to the other, and all walks of life. And you have to remember, in the American election, how many millions of people could vote? In the UK election, how many millions of people can vote? And democracy is critically important that you get it right. And if we're going to make changes to who is allowed to vote in Bermuda, we have to seriously look at those to understand the consequences and the unintended consequences of those type of things. And if you allowed Bermudians living abroad to vote, you would expand your voter base greatly. And I'm not willing to commit to do anything like that until we have consultation with Bermudians about it.
And is that something
that's
you'd consider consulting
Well,
on?
one of the things that came out of the meeting with the PR was that as we move forward with absentee ballots, which we committed to for students and for people on medical leave abroad, is that we would have consultation on that. So I would assume during that consultation period, people are willing and able, they can come forward and talk about all these type of things.
These issues too. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll move on because I know we have quite a lot of questions to get through.
I've got all day. If you serve lunch, I got all day.
Okay, next question is from Andrew Osborne, and he says, Curb recently released their 2016 Racial Justice Platform and asked that elected officials consider their proposals. Many of the items they touched on could be looked at through the lens of reparations. I think this is something that came up recently on social media for you. A student, I think, in London had asked you about reparations. He says, why did the OBA not address reparations in the recent throne speech? And do you support the use of reparations as a means to repair both past and present wrongs against our black population?
Well,
I think it's a similar question to, am I right, as to what you were asked by a student?
If my memory is accurate on this, that you referred to a conversation we had at the reception at the London office about 2 weeks ago, where there was over 80 young Bermudians living in London came. A gentleman asked a question in regards to race from the floor, and then afterwards I mingled and we had open discussion, and that's when we had the conversation about reparations.
Do you support them?
The gentleman started out by talking about affirmative action, and you know, I am always willing to have discussions about important issues, but when somebody asks me a question, I want to get good background, exactly what the person is meaning by it, and also an idea how they think that policy will work. Because if a government's going to move forward with a policy, they need to make sure that they understand the best approach to that. Now, in regards to affirmative action, I think it's an important conversation always to have, and I asked the gentleman put some more meat on the bone on how he think it will work in the Bermudian circumstance. And then he mentioned reparations. And I said, well, you know, reparations is a subject that has come up from time to time, but it's not something that's high on the radar in Bermuda at this present time. But if you would like to start the discussion about it, happy to get involved in it.
What's your gut on reparations? Do you think it could happen, should happen? Should there be, some sort of financial recompense for the black population?
I would rather have the discussion on it so people understand what is meant, because it's like you roll a ball in the middle of the room and everybody wants to kick it. You don't know which direction it's going into. And, you know, reparations is a feel-good thing for people about how it moves forward. But
is it a fair and just thing?
I think the jury's out on that. And so that's why I think we need to have the discussion.
Okay. All right, let's move on to another question. We had education obviously featured greatly in the throne speech, as it does pretty much every year, I would say. And we had a question, this is actually from somebody who didn't want to give their name, but what they were asking it's really about the public school system and whether you sent your children to the public school system and whether you would be willing to. The actual question is, did or would you send your children to Cedar Bridge? Did or would you send your children to the bottom 5 primary schools on the SCORE report? The SCORE report was the report which looked at the physical state of the buildings. What do you say to that? Did you send your children to public school?
My children are 29 and 26 right now.
But you remember?
Oh, I remember, yeah, clearly. My children went to Saltus. My daughter's one of the first females in Saltus. And then went on to the high school and then went to overseas school. And, you know, that's a good political question. You ask a politician, would they send their children there? You know, it's a good political question. They should ask every politician that. But I don't think it comes into the equation, because obviously, well, no, but hear me out for a second, Sam, because where you send your children to school is a family decision. And, you know, I got involved in politics in 1997, 1998, when my children were already in the school system at that time. I sent them to the school that I thought would best cater to what my wife and I wanted done. That's why we sent our children away to school. I believe if it's the best education you can get, the broader you have on your horizon is better for you.
Wouldn't it be great to have that? Wouldn't it be great to have the best education here for everyone?
Oh, I agree. But I do think that in today's world, as far as you can push your education, you should be. So it should be the aspiration of every child, whether they go to public or private school, to go on and get a further degree. So whether they want to go to Bermuda College for 2 years and then go on somewhere else, or they want to go overseas. Because the reason why Bermuda has been successful in international business is because of the talent pool we have here. I just opened up the ILS conference this morning, and they talked about the talent pool here. We need people to come back in and keep creating that talent pool. There's still a shortage of accountants in Bermuda.
But do black Bermudians who are educated in the public education system here, because it's mostly black, I believe,
yeah.
although there's no recorded statistics on that, because I recently asked about it, are they getting a chance to go into IB? Are they getting the kind of education that's going to get them a job in IB?
I think the public education system has its challenges, but I was at the Berkeley graduation this year. I saw out of the 122 to 27 graduates that there was only a handful of them that didn't graduate for various reasons, and they were all coming back to finish their degree. And I saw it was about 100 of them were going away for further education. And that's one of the things that Minister Scott has pushed, is the scholarship ability to go out and offer scholarships as much as possible. And he's continued to look at it to make sure that we allow our public school children access to those scholarships so they won't be held back in the ability to get those.
But they're only going to get the scholarships if they've got the best education in the first place.
And you can get a good education in the public system here. And you know, one of the things we need to stop complaining about is we complain about things sometimes because we like to complain about stuff, but let's be real and let's try to fix it. Look, I've been to Cedar Bridge, I've been to Berkeley, I'll go there. I was at Berkeley recently for the Founders Day. We have some of the brightest minds in Bermuda there, and they're doing good work. I have a young a man who works at Dunkley's. I don't work there anymore because of my job. His children graduated from Cedar Bridge, almost top in the class, and gone away to some of the best universities possible. So let's not make an excuse about public or private. Let's drive it. And there's two things that are important to mention about education. Is one, you need to have family and friends help drive the children. Got to hold them accountable. And the second thing is, we have to hold everyone in the system accountable. And that's important, because too often we make excuses. And you know, I'm going to push the envelope a bit far here this morning when I heard a gentleman who's the head of one of the unions in Bermuda, the teachers union, when he talked about the throne speech.
This week, yeah,
I consider those comments irresponsible.
Why?
Because I don't think the honorable gentleman read the throne speech, because there's some good stuff in there about education, and you can't just dismiss it and
There's
say.
always good stuff, but does it...
He didn't admit to any of it by those comments.
There's been talk of strategic plans for a long time.
And it has happened. Look at the controversy come out, Sam, and let's not forget, you know, how we get to a certain position. The controversy came out when the minister put the school report out there. Everyone says, why are we doing another report? The minister says, because I want to know what's happening in schools. And he's gone about it systematically improving the schools. But people wanted to complain about the report, and now they want to complain we're not doing enough. Well, at least give the minister credit for doing that and moving through on it. And you know, with the latest mold situation, we take that seriously. But there's got to be accountability across the board. And how did we allow that mold to develop there? People were in those rooms every day of the week. Let's do something about it. Yeah, let's do something about it, yeah.
Why do you think white people in general here, expats and Bermudians, why do you think they're not willing to send their kids to public schools? Because isn't that part of the problem?
Yeah, I think it can be part of the problem, but look, one of the things that is important in the country that we live in, and all the countries that surround ourselves, is freedom of choice. And you know, I believe more people would want to send their children to public education if we didn't just badmouth public education all the time. I mean, if something's badmouth, why do people want to go there?
Because I guess
and
it's
also,
a
I
balance
think
about you know, constructive criticism. You know, you
right.
need constructive
Well,
criticism, right?
but to some extent, but constructive criticism doesn't have to be negative, cynical criticism. Constructive criticism can be couched in a way that is important to move forward on it. And that's one of the things that frustrates me about the daily media that comes out. One of the things that's very frustrating about the recent American election, because it was all this type of stuff, and now they want to kiss and make up. But humans don't operate well like that. So if we're going to be critical of the education system or anything in Bermuda, let's do it in a way where we don't diss our children who put their future in the hands of that. And that's why I think, because the public school system might have a stigma by some people that it's not the good thing. But I would stand up and say that, you know, it has proven to be a success for those people. We need to keep improving it.
With that in mind then, if you had school-age children now, would you send them to a public school?
I'm a little bit late in those years, so
Well,
it's
the
a question that's
is
not
still
going to
there.
happen. I would certainly consider it.
You would. And do you
Yeah.
think many of your cabinet have their children in the public school system?
Well, I haven't specifically thought about it, but the cabinet is
Because then they've got skin in the game, haven't they? Then they're, you know.
well, yeah, you've got skin in the game, but also, you know, you've got the freedom of choice where you want to send it for the best. And, you know, I don't think it's fair just to focus on where people send their children, because you have to accept politicians for being sincere in what they're going to bring to the table and how they're going to do it.
Although David Burt did recently pledge that if he's still a serving politician when his children reach school age, he will send them to the local
Yeah.
neighbourhood public school.
Politicians do pledge a lot of those type of things. You know, let's see how they deliver it. But, you know,
I'll be
with,
checking back, yeah.
with recent conversations that have come outside of the PLP, you have to wonder if that pledge will hold.
Okay. You kind of answered this question, but I'll tell you, you know, this same person had said, in which case would you support a law mandating that the children of any serving politician are obliged to go to a government school? And I'm guessing from what you've said about freedom of choice.
I mean, I think that question is something that, you know, is red meat for a discussion. But look, politicians are, they have a lot of oversight in what they do, and it's increasing. By the throne speech, you will see that. And that's not going to change, because all politicians are considered PEPs, politically exposed persons. And with the way people look at transparency and accountability, it's tough. We have a challenge getting people involved in politics, good people with experience and the capabilities and the qualities to move forward, because of the cut and thrust and the negative tenure quite often, and how people get, you know, people get personal about it, and, you know, the recent graffiti and stuff. Just think, Sam, you've got children. Just think how you would feel if you were married to a politician, how your children would feel coming home from school one day and say, Daddy, you know, they said that about you. Is that true? You know, before the 2007 election, I was receiving threats about being a drug dealer and stuff. You think I enjoyed that? You think my family enjoyed that? And so I don't want to raise the bar of that type of behavior, because you're not going to get as many good people as you like. We need to really come forward with the honest intent of doing something about it. And, you know, don't hold animosity about if you join the PLP or the OVA or whatever party. Accept that those people have values they want to live for and work for and represent people, and don't try to be personal about it, because we'll struggle to get people involved.
Okay. I'm going to take a look at our Facebook feed now and just see, because we don't have too long left, I'm just going to take a look and see.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Well, exactly. And I'm just going to see if we have any coming up on here. Okay. They're not, they don't seem to be coming up on the screen, but let me just take a look. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Let me go back to some of the questions that were sent in advance. We had one, somebody called Nessie Armstrong had asked, the OBA government has announced on numerous occasions the commencement of construction at Morgan's Point and the St George's site. To date, no construction has started. What is the real reason for the delay, and will you guarantee that both of these projects will start in 2017?
Well, thank you, Nessie, for that question. She's not entirely correct, because Morgan's Point has started. I was up there just a couple of weeks ago. Phase 1 has started. I saw foundations in for 5 separate buildings around the bay. I think the project's going to be called Caroline Bay. I was up there, saw the barge coming in, unloading product for the site and for the marina. The marina will be anticipated to be finished by the America's Cup. So they are moving forward. There's no doubt about that. There are over 100 construction workers on site, so that's very exciting. In regards to St. George's, we tabled legislation on Monday they put plans into planning department. We're moving forward with that. With the support of colleagues in the House, we can pass that legislation, and they will break ground in 2017. I think what Nessie and your viewers here today can appreciate is that, you know, we're not talking about building a bus shelter, for example. We're talking about building a huge project over a significant area with a number of different facets to it. And it takes time. Just recently, over the weekend, we did a survey to make sure that the site would continue to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site, because we didn't want to build on property that could have been historically of significance with artifacts there, so that work was completed. So there's a lot that happened. So just like Nessie and everyone in St. George's, I know MP, Junior Minister Kenny Bascom and MP Nandi Outerbridge are very keen to see it move forward. They keep pushing in caucus for that. We're excited about it, and I do believe the reality is just around the corner. In fact, Minister Fay is away right now at a tourism conference, which we are trying to attract to Bermuda next year, and he will be meeting with the principals of Deseralis again. So all things are go, but there are things that have to be put in place first.
Okay, let's take another one. We have one from Luke Mitchell. He's asking about, well, I'll read it. In a country already heavily taxed and with communications so important to the governance and well-being of the country, does the Premier support the requested dual increases in telecommunications and radio taxes imposed and proposed this year upon providers and users of communications equipment, cell phones, internet, radio, etc., designed specifically to make money for the regulatory authority?
Well, no one likes to pay taxes. So let me say that up front. So just like the man in the street, I don't like to pay taxes too, but we have to pay taxes. And it is, I think, a bit of a consternation to people because we live in a fairly expensive environment to live in. But the fact of the matter is, if we are going to have services, and people complain when we don't have certain government services, if we're going to have regulation, which is critical, Sam, you'll have seen in the throne speech, further regulation has to take place because of oversight that's taking place throughout the world. And the regulatory authority has to be run, and I think to date, since its inception and the good work that's been done by the minister and all the team involved, they have made progress. There are some areas that we have to work through, but taxation is part of it, and we'll try to keep it to the minimum. But in this regard, I know when the changes were made, I believe April 1st in the current budget, there was some concern about it. But it's important not only for the regulation, but for us to move forward and make sure we have a system that provides opportunity and access for all, and that's the key. Okay.
We have another question. We probably don't have time for too many more, but I'll try and get in a few more.
As long as the feed's going, I'll talk for a little while longer.
Okay, great. I think last time we spoke after my throne speech, roads came up. They all seem to come up. People are concerned about the roads, and somebody called Karen Skiffington writes to say, I note that the government is committed to paving 10 kilometres of roads this year and next year. And she asked specifically about Sands Parish. She says the roads are in a deplorable state, as was noted by the former Governor George Ferguson. No work has been done on these roads. Can you commit to Sands Parish for upgrades?
Well, the minister has been pretty aggressive in his oversight for it. I have obviously talked to him on a regular basis about it. We need to balance the need to get the work done, which roads are in the worst condition, with how much we can get done in appropriate time. Yeah, the west end of the island will get some attention. In fact,
in the next 12 months.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. And I can't recall the specific schedule, but the minister shared with me that schedule probably about a month or 2 months ago. And he will move forward on that. We still have probably about 4K to do for the balance of this financial year, and then next year we'll start at it again. And, just against that backdrop, our roads are going to need more attention because we have larger vehicles on the roads, and that's starting to wear them down even more. And so that 10K we have met that target the last couple of years, and we'll meet it again next year and the year going forward.
Okay. Karen also asks, she says, and this is quite interesting in relation to same-sex, well, it's not quite in relation to same-sex marriage. What she says is a disparity now exists in relation to the Human Rights Act that needs to be recognised. A work permit is not now needed for the non-Bermudian partner in a same-sex relationship, but one is still required for a non-Bermudian partner in a relationship between opposite sex. She says, I note there is a policy for partners on the Immigration Department website, but it only provides permission to seek and reside employment. Are you going to try and do anything to get rid of that disparity, or is that not something that's on your radar?
I would have to speak specifically to the Minister of Home Affairs about that matter, but this was something generally same-sex that came up when I was over in the UK at that reception as well. And we clearly told the people of Bermuda through the summer when we were going through the process of this potential civil union bill, the referendum. It was an educational process so people could understand what's going on. And now that the people have shown on both sides of the equation where they stand, the matters before the courts, and we're going to allow the courts to decide what they have to do.
Although not
Once,
specific
no,
things.
but once the courts opine on matters, then we as a government will take a look at what needs to be done to ameliorate in the most appropriate way to cover areas like this.
Okay. Let's see, we'll maybe take a few more just for the next couple of minutes if we can keep going.
Just speak up. Again.
Speak up, I'm so sorry. Apparently I'm not speaking loudly enough. Okay, let me take a look. Yeah, we've had more on our Facebook feed. We're getting mainly ones about education. It looks like, which I think we have largely covered. Cannabis, which is mentioned. Somebody asks, do you think that it's more practical and safer to simply legalise the cultivation of marijuana rather than the obscure and uncertain decriminalisation of small quantities for personal use?
Well, obviously the answer to that question is no, because we put it in the throne speech that we will look at decriminalisation for small amounts.
That's been on the cards for that's been talked about, hasn't it?
No, not really.
In a consultation paper on decriminalising.
No, there was the cannabis reform committee that I put together. I think it was in 2013 when I was the Minister of National Security, and they did a very comprehensive report. At that time, we dealt with medical marijuana. In this throne speech, we're going to expand that to allow the consideration of other new substances that have come that will help people during those difficult times for medical causes. And the decriminalization part, look, this is a subject that's been talked about for a long time, and it comes up on the doorstep quite often because we have young men specifically, young black men who are put on the stop list because of small amounts of it. And I want to make sure, with the full support of my colleagues, that we can stop that type of challenge. Now look, there's a big debate about marijuana, not only in Bermuda, but in many parts of the world. And I think it is very unfortunate that young people are using substance like that, because it slows the development of young people's brains, and a lot of our young males are the ones who are using it. And I think if we are going to raise the next generation to be our next leaders, to take the baton from us and to move forward, we have to give them every opportunity to do so in a productive fashion. I do not support allowing people to use substances any further than there is at the present time, because when you're young, I think you need to concentrate on your maturation, your education, learning the proper values in your life. And
does that mean you're against decriminalisation?
No. I'm against, at this point in time, I haven't been convinced that legalization will help us with the challenge.
Okay.
Right? Decriminalization, I think it is wrong that somebody has a small amount and it's a scar for the rest of their life. I remember when I was 15, 16, I did some things, but for the grace of God, I could have been in the hospital for a bike accident, for speeding or something like that.
I thought you were going to say you'd smoked marijuana.
No, I'm not going to say anything like that, because some people sensationalize it to, for any number of reasons. I remember the debate very clearly in the House of Assembly where one member said that. But the fact of the matter is, my father died at a very young age from a stroke, from smoking cigarettes. Right. And I was 15 or 16. My brother was 2 years younger, 2 years older sister, and 4 years younger sister. And from that point on, it was a shock. Father was, my hero. It was all our families, and we looked up to the guy. But to see a strong man, seemed healthy in the community, come back from a morning run to drop dead after a stroke. He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. That told me something, that you have to protect your health as much as you can. And it was my goal to make sure I could live to 40. Because I saw my father die at 40. I said, and I vowed I would never smoke a cigarette. I would try to be healthy. Now, I have my vices, but when I was young, I didn't partake in that stuff because I wanted to live. And that should be the same message to our young people. if you get involved in things that are not going to help you move forward, you're going to be pulled back. And if you're pulled back in the world that we live now, it means people are going to pass you, and you're not going to have the life that is as nourishing and as rewarding and as comforting as you like. And so this is a good subject to discuss, but I want healthy people moving forward. And that's why we formed the Premier's Council on Fitness.
And I see that in the front speech
Yeah,
too, which we
yeah.
haven't really managed to
Yeah.
touch on. I'm going to ask a question about, because it's specifically mentioned in the Thorn speech, and this is the extensive review by corrections of all the rehabilitation programmes in our prisons. And it's an issue that's come up this week, of course, because you'd have seen the headlines about the paedophile who was...
I haven't been reading the Royal Gazette.
No. Why would you?
Well, I get it delivered every day. It's been late a couple of days this week.
Well, for good reason.
Bad weather?
Well, apparently this gentleman, not that he is a gentleman, but apparently having undergone no rehabilitation, he's been released back into the community without any supervision. Is there sufficient rehabilitation for sex offenders in prisons right now? I mean, you know, yes, there is. And what he said about this offender was, but he couldn't take part in group therapy, so it was very difficult for us to actually, you know, make sure he got any rehabilitation. What do you say to that? Should this guy be out now after no rehabilitation whatsoever?
Well, should and the concern of the community are two things. Because if somebody's sentenced and if the sentence is carried out and all the facets around it, you cannot stop the release of a person. And in that circumstance, that was the case. Now,
Well,
but hear me out for a second. In regard to pedophiles, there's no doubt that we need to be more proactive as a community in this regard. And I brought some changes to the Parole Act a couple of years ago, which I thought at that time was supported by the House, improved what we do. But I think the time's come now to discuss it with you, not only corrections but judiciary as well, to make sure that what we do will be effective. Because there are programs that are not being used because they're not mandated to be used. And I think we need to get serious about it.
should they be mandated?
Yeah, should there be? But I think it has to be. But I think one of the things that I found out as a legislature is that you have to allow the judicial branch to have their authority and the latitude to do what they have to do. So I think the time has come where we should allow them the ability to mandate X, Y, Z and go forward and track it. Now, I think the programs in corrections, from the time that I was a minister, I always found Mr. Lamb and his team to be very proactive about these things with some of the programs they put in. But we need to constantly look at the tools. Now, I'm not an expert in sexual offenses in any way, but from what I understand is there's only so much you can do because those type of predators really can't be cured like I can be from the common cold. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we get a better understanding of what is driving those individuals, to make sure that they are protected and the public are protected when they come out.
Should the public have been notified about this?
Well,
This offender's release?
the public has been notified.
Well, but not through any actions of the authorities.
Well, I don't know, but it may be the actions of the media doing a good job as well.
Absolutely,
but, you know,
but it shouldn't. Should it fall to the media?
Well, but just let me give a little bit of backdrop, and I might be repeating some of the stuff that's already been out there, but that's good because sometimes a lot of stuff doesn't get out in the media because you can't print a 50-page paper every day. But the minister informed colleagues, and the Attorney General and the minister were aware of it and working on it over the weekend. They spoke to the acting commissioner of police. The man in question had the documentation to fill out, had reported to the police, and so they had a close monitoring on what he was doing. The Attorney General was deciding on the correct course of action because he believed that he had a good assessment of any threat to the community, and he was moving forward on it. And then Monday morning, a media outlet broke the story with a name. And so that probably jumped ahead of the circumstances. But remember, we're going to take advice from corrections and from the police on this matter, and then the Attorney General will make decisions. What is frustrating about this, and I'm not blaming anyone in particular, is we've got to move away from this out of sight, out of mind mentality. And I saw you squint on that, and here's why. Because
I don't quite know what you mean. What
well,
in relation to?
But because we talk about issues when they're prevalent because somebody's released or somebody has an accident. Yeah? Or, you know, we break
We
ground for a
react,
hotel.
yeah.
We're reactive. We've got to stop being reactionary. And, you know, there's a joint select committee that was formed to
And
look
I was
into
going to
this.
ask you about
They,
some time ago.
I don't sit on the committee, so I'm not aware. But that committee needs to come back to the House and report. And then that report needs to get to the proper arm of government so we can enact important legislation. There was also protocols that were drafted under the form of government that attorney generals have looked at and haven't moved forward on it. But
Over the course of 15 years, apparently.
I'm not
according to
sure.
The Attorney General yesterday.
Yeah.
So this ability to issue a public notification, it's existed in law for 15 years, but it's never been used because the protocols have never been.
Yes, but the
Okay.
attorney general can still what they have to do, and the AG decided that over the weekend he didn't need to make the notification because he had talked to the police. Now there'll be those in the community who would
Okay.
differ with that assessment.
So he decided he wasn't a threat.
At that point in time, he decided it wasn't necessary to do it right over the weekend. I wouldn't say it wasn't an important matter, but it wasn't necessary to do it over the weekend because they had talked to the police and they had moved forward on it. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't take this matter very seriously. It doesn't mean that, one, we want to protect the public right now. So the notification is out there, and if there's more notification that needs to be done, that's when the media can
Well, we
can
don't
move
have
on.
a photograph of the offender.
I was hoping we would get it. I have asked.
We can move on. Yeah.
Well, I am the acting minister of national security now, so I asked the PS and the corrections commissioner to provide a photograph that can be out there for you. But the most important thing now that is out there is for people to pay attention. And the critical thing for me now is, okay, we've had a good airing of this subject. It's not going to go away unless we fix it in the appropriate way.
Because there'll be more
I want to
offenders
protect.
who are reaching their
I want to
parole
protect
date.
my children, your children, and everyone else. And so we need to make some changes that are appropriate to it. And there are many things that we can do. You know, we can talk about the lack of parole for sex offenders. You know, in certain areas. So I'm going to move to push my colleagues, the Attorney General and the Minister of National Security, to make sure that they come with some suggestions going forward. But to do that, it would be helpful for that Joint Select Committee to table the report, because I would not want government to move forward and then the Joint Select Committee, for those who are watching and listening, that's committee of the House, both houses who come forward. It'd be senseless for them to do work and not have it included. So let's hope that happens.
it's needed.
Let's hope, yeah, quickly.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap things up because we've got
Sure.
about 15 minutes over time.
Fine.
I really just want to say thank you, Premier, for both for sitting down and doing this and for being so open to you know, a wide range of subjects. We didn't get through all the questions. What we will do, what we'll commit to doing, is to making sure the Premier gets to see all those questions, and perhaps he'll be able to, you know, respond directly to people. I know you're very active on social media, or come back to us, but certainly we'll make sure you see all the questions that our readers wanted to put to you. And with that,
Yeah.
I'll just say thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And
All
I'm
right.
happy to answer all those questions. If you send them to me, I'm happy to answer them through your media, because they were sent to you. But also, yeah, I do stay open and accountable. I still have the Ask Your Premier
Yes.
email address to use, and I'm happy to come back anytime. I hope we work through the technical difficulties, but
What we did too.
I'm happy to come back at any time to answer questions, because it's important we stay in touch. I work better, my colleagues work better if we're having that open dialogue.
Great.
And sometimes it might be uncomfortable, but it's important.
Yes, brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
watching.